All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to a new video, and I hope you're ready to talk some books today. Now, reading obviously is not something mandatory. And when I say that these books are essentials, I don't mean that you cannot consider yourself a musician if you don't own them. But the point is that reading, among other tools, is a great way to gather more information about the way you should approach art in general. The right book at the right time can make you question the way you approach your instrument, and therefore optimize your relationship with it. And I'm starting to sweat. There you go, way better. The right book can also answer all those psychological questions of why you feel like you're never good enough and stuff like that. Also, the beautiful thing about these books, or at least my experience with them, is that once they enter your life, they never leave. You don't just read them once, you keep coming back at them over and over again. So, without further ado, let's talk about the 4 essential books that I believe any musician should read. Number 1 on the list, Benny Grabb's Effective Practicing for Musicians. Now, even though this list does not really follow a specific order in which you should read these books, I believe this is the only one that I would suggest to both beginners as well as advanced musicians. It probably also is the most practical book out of the entire list. Now, if you're a drummer, you will most likely already know Benny, but this book was written for everybody, for all musicians, not just drummers. It really just is what the title says. It's a practical guide on how to practice more effectively. There is a lot of psychology involved, and it actually starts way before the actual practicing act in itself. It helps you fighting the friction distance between you and your practicing routine with simple but yet effective tips, like how to organize your space so that it becomes a space that you want to spend time in practicing instead of a task that you have to do. It invites you to keep track of your daily habits with like time logging so that you can have a better practice routine with the time at your disposal. It tells you how to deal with self judgment. It tells you how to tackle difficult patterns that might seem very hard, at least technically first. And it will ultimately show you a method to design your own practicing routine based on your specific musical goals. I mean, it really gets you covered on everything in a very fun way, too. Benny is super fun. All right, number 2 on the list, The Inner Game of Tennis. Okay, I recently discovered that Timothy Galway also wrote another book with Barry Green called The Inner Game of Music. This might make you think that reading The Inner Game of Music instead of The Inner Game of Tennis might be the best option. Sure, if they read the book, it's probably for a good reason, and I cannot really make a comparison between the two because I have only read The Inner Game of Tennis. But with that said, I could tell you that reading The Inner Game of Tennis could be even more valuable because by reading it, you realize that basically any discipline on earth, whether it's artistical or sports, is virtually connected by the same exact principles. And basically, if you think a certain way, you're going to perform a certain way. That's the whole concept of the book. As a matter of fact, The Inner Game of Tennis takes a deep dive into the relationship between our mind and our body. The idea behind self one being the conscious part of our mind and the self two being the unconscious and intuitive part of our brain is greatly explained. And it's great to see in how many ways one can affect the other. Obviously, since it's a book about tennis, it also covers the aspects of winning versus losing, which is a subject that does not really translate into playing an instrument. But in my opinion, because of that, it's also a great reminder for us as musicians to understand more of the fact that we don't have to fall into the competition trap. Because of this mind to mind and mind to body connection, The Inner Game of Tennis helps me to introduce the closely related next book, which is Effortless Mastery. Okay, you probably saw this coming since it's an absolute milestone for musicians in general. But let me spend a few words about it. First of all, I think this is not a real beginner type reading. This is a book that starts being helpful to all those musicians who have gone over that honeymoon phase with their instrument. When you start to experience that idea of how small you can feel compared to all the unimaginable, infinite possibilities that you can spend decades, uh, thousands of years trying to learn, that's when this book comes to hand. So this offers a very theoretical part at first that is very connected to The Inner Game of Tennis, as I was saying, but obviously from a more musician's perspective. But then it gets into a more practical aspect with actual meditations and guided meditations. As a matter of fact, I have the CD here. As you can see, now they may have it with MP3s. You may stream the meditations, I don't know. But this one was with the CD. It really puts the accent on the idea of being in the moment effortlessly flowing on the instrument and trying to get rid of self-judgment, fear of playing, fear of practicing, perfectionism, all that stuff that really haunts us. Also, the beautiful thing is that the way Kenny Werner talks about himself in the book really feels like he's talking about you. Like if you read it at the right time in your life, in your journey, in your musical journey, you're reading the pages and you're like, that's me. The way this guy is talking about the person that he's describing, that's me 100%. And yet, he makes you feel like everything's fine, that there's a solution for everything, and that you shouldn't be worried about it. And finally, number 4 on the list, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. So this one has been the latest addition to my collection of these 4 books specifically, and it's also the most recent one that has come out. I believe the best way to describe this book is to give you a very personal point of view of how I experienced the book itself. When I got it, I was looking for something that could get me out of that drummer syndrome, where you've been studying, practicing, you've basically gathered a lot of information, and you might lose focus on what's the actual point of playing an instrument, which is to create something. And that's what the books really wants to do, wants you to create. We as musicians can get so much into gear, technique, methods, you name it, that at some point we highly take the risk to become musical instruments collectors and not actual musicians. And that is the kind of trap that I really wanted to avoid. Luckily enough, this book came out exactly when I was looking for it. Now, I've heard some people complaining about the fact that this book is not that practical and that it doesn't really give you any solutions for being more creative. Personally, I think that this book could only work with the type of approach that has been utilized. It's very conceptual and it really wants to put the reader, in this case the artist, back in the driver's seat of the creative act. And that cannot work with a preset formula. But with that said, because of the way the book presents its content, it might not be the type of book for everyone. In my opinion, if you want to read it, just know that if you're looking for the prepared recipe for being creative, you're not going to find it in this one. To me, though, it really feels like a Bible. Like I just open it from time to time and read a random page, and it always feels helpful. And if you get the chance, I highly encourage you guys to do the same thing. Just if you pass in a bookstore, go look for this book, open it, read a page, and if you're tuned in with the same type of thinking, it'll be helpful. I also want to say that this book really works for anyone who is into creating anything. It doesn't just work for musicians, it definitely doesn't work just for drummers. So these are 4 books that I believe any musician should read. But obviously there are many more, and who knows, maybe we'll do a second list in the future. Obviously, let me know if there are any books that you feel like are essentials for musicians. For now, I just wanted to let you know that you find the links to all these books in the description box. Thanks for watching, people. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.